Hi everyone, welcome to Type Talks. Today we have Frank James with us, the skit creator in the MBTI community. And you've probably already seen his videos because he is one of the most popular MBTI YouTubers, and he is the rising tide that raises all ships. He gets people into MBTI. He is the gateway drug into this community for a lot of people. And so we have Frank to thank for that. The community greatly appreciates all that you offer, and you are a celebrity in the sphere, so I'm honored to be in your presence.
Oh boy, wow.
I'm giving you an image to live up to. I'm kidding.
Well,
No pressure, no pressure.
thank you, Joyce. I appreciate it, and I'm glad to be here. I enjoy your interviews.
Awesome. And so I'm curious, Frank. I think some of my audience doesn't know about you as a human being. And so I would like to ask about your life. You are a new dad, so congratulations on that. Heck yeah.
Thank
And
you.
I'm wondering how it's like to embrace the father life.
It's great. It's definitely a what would you call it? A change, an entire change of the baseline of your life. I'm trying to think of what the word is. It is it'll come to me eventually. It's a sea change, as Shakespeare said. So, but it's great. I think going into it, I was very worried. Because everyone says your life changes totally when you become a parent. So I was like, oh crap, my life is over. But actually, no. A child brings so much joy to your life, and you like can't even imagine how much you love a child. Like, I mean, obviously, intellectually, you're like, oh yeah, of course, I'm gonna love my kid more than anything. But it's like until you feel it, you don't really know. And so it's just it's been amazing. My son is going to be 6 months old this week, and it's amazing to see him become a person and develop his personality. And yeah, it's just amazing. I highly recommend Parenthood.
Yeah. If you want to expedite your personal growth and give a lot of new life experiences to you, parenthood is one of the ways you can go down that route. That's really amazing. And it seems like you are a great parent. And I'm wondering if you notice any pros and cons your personality type brings to parenthood.
That's a good question because I think on the one hand, I am always it's hard to know because it's like with a baby, is he giving off the same signals that an adult would? Like do those expressions mean the same emotion that an adult would have? You do Obviously kids don't have the brain development of even an older child. So I'm always like reading into how he feels, and I think that can be a positive because I'm like tuned into that. But then it can also be like putting too much pressure on myself sometimes to keep him happy because I'm like worried. Oh man, is he like freaking out about something? Like for instance, when we the first time when we brought him to daycare, we're like, oh man, is he gonna think we're abandoning him? Is he gonna be sad? Blah blah blah. It's like, no, he doesn't have any concept of any of that. Like he's having a great time. He's having experiences. He's making baby friends. So it's stuff like that where you're just like uh, sometimes overcompensating, but then I think there are other times where having the feeling preference, especially extroverted feeling, helps because it's like, I feel like I understand him on a level that is not easy to express. Like even though we're not able to communicate with words, uh, I feel like I really do kind of get what he wants and needs, what he's feeling in any moment. But maybe that's just me telling myself a story and I have no clue. I don't know.
There's no real way to know, but there is this desire to infer into his emotional experience and
Yeah.
to hopefully mirror it as much as possible to look over his emotional well being. So you want to be in sync with how he feels and make sure you honor it as much as possible. There are a lot of new couples who talk about baby proofing your relationships. So, having a baby is one of the biggest milestones that some couples have. And it's one of the biggest stress tests for relationships, too. And so, that's very awesome that you're figuring out really great ways that help you with navigating your newborn. So,
Yeah.
yeah. Speaking of your newborn, I'm wondering about your dynamic with your wife, who is a TE dominant. So is she an ENTJ or an ESTJ? Have you
I
parsed that out?
I'm not exactly sure. I'll just say ENTJ for, to eliminate ambiguity. It's I think sometimes it's hard to pick up for me at least on the middle preference. So,
Yeah.
yeah. But yeah, because it's kind of balanced. So I see the sensing, I see the intuition. I feel like the more you get to know someone, the harder it is to pick apart the preference sometimes because you're always able to think of really good exceptions to whatever case you're trying to prove for one or the other. Yeah, but I think TE dominant is pretty defendable of a position. Although sometimes, she talks very fluently about emotions. And, sometimes I'm like, am I hearing like some kind of like weird FE? Like, I don't know what's going on. But I think, I think TE is probably the best case to be made there. So us working together as parents is interesting. Like when it is true, like it is a stress test for a relationship because once you put a baby into the mix, your priorities are shifted a lot in ways where you maybe didn't expect. Like your life changes. My friend JJ McCullough, who's a YouTuber, he has said this. He was telling me this before. He's giving me all this advice. He's like, I know all these people who are parents, and they all say like your life changes in ways that you didn't expect, and then it doesn't change in ways that you thought it would. And it was all good. Like the ways it changed were good. The ways it didn't change were good also. But your priorities shift and you stop focusing primarily on each other as a couple and you're focusing on your child. And sometimes that can accidentally lead to neglecting the relationship or getting, even like just getting short with each other sometimes because it's like, hey, we got to, this is the priority now. There's also, when it comes to dividing up responsibilities, that's a big thing because no matter, like I feel like I'm a pretty present father, but no matter how good of a dad you are, you're not able to do as much as the mother is usually. So there's always that dynamic of like, man, I gotta step up my game. And even still, it's like, I hope I'm doing enough. I hope I'm not, we're not building some kind of resentment up. So communication is very important. You have to communicate more than you're used to because before the baby, communication is just like natural all the time. And there's not that much to communicate about relatively. And then once you have
Mm.
the kid, you're put in this emotional pressure cooker of sorts and you're not talking to each other unless you take time to do it. And that's even like with us, our baby is like the easiest baby in the world. Everyone's telling us this is not a normal baby. He doesn't cry, he doesn't fuss, he slept through the night like when he was a month old. So we're doing well in terms of like how things in comparison to how things could be. And even then it's tough. So I can only imagine if you have like a normal baby who cries a decent amount, who doesn't sleep through the night all the way yet, it would be even more trying. So it's just a matter of being aware, being conscious of what's happening. And I think knowing the personality differences also is great because it helps me. Like I am I am overly sensitive, I think. And if I didn't know that my wife has extroverted thinking dominant, and in like objective personality terms, it's masculine extroverted thinking. If I didn't know that, I would be much more sensitive. I'm able to like distance myself a little bit and be like, okay, this is just like the communication that you would get from this type. No big deal. But it's just like when a TE dominant needs help, they'll just say, I need help. Get over here now. This thing needs to be done. Why haven't you done this? And to a type with extroverted feeling, when you prefer extroverted feeling, it's kind of like, whoa, like what do we have to work about? Like, what are the tasks that need to be done? It doesn't matter. We put that off. We're having a good time. That's what matters, right? Let me cook some dinner for you, even though it's totally impractical. We don't have the time for it. And there's like other things that should be done instead. So it's good to be aware of her communication with that function, as well as how I receive it, given my functions, and like what I'm also doing that's probably irritating her by focusing on what she probably thinks is totally irrelevant emotional stuff when there are things to be done, right? But overall, I can't complain. It's going well. I think that's the best. That's what I'm most thankful for when it comes to learning personality typology, is that awareness of other people and how they are fundamentally different in certain ways. I mean, we're all fundamentally the same in other ways, but ways that we might think that person should rephrase what they're saying. Like I sugarcoat everything I say, and my wife doesn't, and she doesn't understand, why would you sugarcoat it? It's like wasting time. Just say what you need to say, what you need to have happen. So I'm very thankful for that knowledge. It is definitely making married life a little bit easier than I think it would be without that.
With ENTJs and ESTJs, they like things to be blunt and upfront, and they expect that from the other person too. And it can be surprising as an INFJ or as a type that prefers their feeling. They may be like, oh, I don't want to be blunt because I don't want to hurt your feelings, when they don't even need you to consider their feelings as much as you might feel the inclination to. And so there's this adjustment period where you get used to saying what's on your mind without sugarcoating at all, because that's actually how they prefer it. And the ENTJ, the TE dominant, is more likely to sacrifice feeling good for efficiency. It's like, it's okay if we step over people's toes a little bit to get the job done in a timely manner. And then the extroverted feeling user, the FJ, it's quite ironic that your name is Frank James FJ for like INFJ.
It worked out, yeah.
It's meant by the universe. So these high extroverted feeling types, if they're going to sacrifice something, it's sacrificing a little bit of efficiency to make sure everyone feels good. And so sometimes that might clash a little bit.
Yeah. And let me, pardon me if I'm stepping on a thought there, but I just had something that's interesting I've noticed is with extroverted thinking, a lot of times they seem less decisive than is the stereotype, And I think a lot of times that comes down to that sacrificing of their own feelings, because they're like, whatever, like, they'll say, my wife says all the time, like, I don't care, whatever you want. And on the one hand, that's just sort of like trying to make things more efficient rather than have a back and forth. She's just like, you make the decision. But it's also like, she doesn't want to put out her FI, if you will, and say, this is what she doesn't want to stand on that in a decision-making situation. So a lot of times things kind of get left up in the air because we both have extroverted decision-making functions that we prefer. A lot of times we're just kind of like kicking the ball back and forth, and it's like, okay, I often find myself having to play that part of the introverted decision maker and just be like, okay, we're doing this, deal with it,
Yeah, because sometimes the EJ type, so the ENTJ or ESTJ, may just want what the tribe wants, because it's like, I don't want to focus on how I feel about this. I just want to get the thing done in a way where everyone agrees the most. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, it's an efficient decision making for sure. And I find INFJs have a buffet style of making decisions. So it's like everyone is eating at a buffet, and they're seeing, okay, I want everyone to eat what they like at this buffet, but at the end, we want all this food to be eaten. So eventually someone's going to have to eat the broccoli, but I hope everyone can do as many tasks as they enjoy up to that point. And so there's this desire to get people's needs met along the way as much as possible. With extroverted feeling, they do have a group decision-making element like the ENTJ, but it's directed towards meeting everyone's emotional needs.
Yeah. It's sort of like, oh, if we meet those emotional needs, the work will get done somehow. Like someone will eat the broccoli. Is that kind of what you're going for with that?
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah.
So I'm curious about the love story behind you and your ENTJ. You guys met over a dating app, right? And
hmm
what was it that drew you to her? What are your favorite qualities about her?
So I did a so uh yeah, so we met on Hinge, and that's an app where it's sort of just like six prompts that are it's just like six questions, and they're kind of goofy. It's like, you finish the sentence. It's like, if I like the thing that most scares me is blah blah blah. I forget, I don't even remember what they are. Or the partner I'm looking for will blah blah blah. And it's like not much information. So I was doing, if you're familiar with Seinfeld, I was doing a George Costanza there, where I was doing the opposite of my impulse when I went on this app, because I was always like, I want to know going into date one as much as I can about this person, so I can kind of just weed things out beforehand. Like, I didn't want to put in a lot of effort into actually meeting people in person. I wanted to do most of that work beforehand on the app. And so, like, on a site like OkCupid, people can write like a whole novel about themselves and answer like 45,000 questions about themselves. And what I was finding is that was putting up so many filters that I was just like not able to find any matches. Like, it was like no one was good enough. So on Hinge, I was like, open it up, baby. Let's see whatever, I'm gonna like lower the filters a lot, so I'm just more open-minded. And instead of trying to make the decision in advance, I'm gonna meet the person ahead of time, or not ahead of time. I'm gonna meet the person without trying to figure it out ahead of time. So I was trying to tap into some extroverted sensing rather than, the introverted intuition planning. And so when I forget what happened. I think she messaged me first, and her profile wasn't like, it wasn't like immediate, like, this is the one. But I was like, sure, let's go on a date, whatever. And the first date didn't go well. Like, I showed up 20 minutes late because I couldn't find parking. It was like it was a coffee shop downtown, and like parking was impossible. It's a place that I had been many times before, so I was very confident that I could find parking, and I couldn't. So I was 20 minutes late. We meet. I say, hey, I'm gonna get coffee. Do you want some? She says, no, I'm good. And so I was like, okay, she's written me off, whatever. So I get my coffee, I sit down. So I had totally released myself from any kind of anxiety at that point, because I figured the date was ruined. So I was just like, whatever, let's just have a conversation. Let's, enjoy ourselves. And then she said she had to go like 45 minutes later. So I was like, okay, this, I did not see much hope there. And then at the end of the date, because I figured it was a lost cause anyway, I was just like, yeah, I'll be in touch. Like, instead of ending the date with like, this, I hope we can do this again soon, let's set up the next one. I was just like, I'll be in touch. And I guess that was enough of a breadcrumb where, she messaged me back. She was like, hey, let's go out again. I was like, yeah, let's do it. And the communication was just so easy. Like, our second date was like it was more of a real date. It wasn't like a 45-minute like introduction. So we were able to talk for a lot longer, and it was just like effortless. And I never felt like I had to be someone that I wasn't. And well, like, I didn't feel like I had to impress her. And so it was just natural from that point on. And there was never any moment where it felt like oh my gosh, I've got to make a decision about, progressing this relationship to the next level. Do I ask her to be my girlfriend? Do I propose? It's like, it was all just like, well, duh, yeah, of course. Like, we're there anyway. Why not just formalize it? So yeah, it proved to me that when people say stuff like when you just know, it's true. Like you do, like it's not like a light bulb that goes off. It's just sort of like you don't have to think about it. It's just, well, obviously this is right. And to answer the question directly, what drew me to her, I think it was just there was like no pretense. It wasn't, and she wasn't like trying to pretend to be someone she wasn't. I think both of us met at just the right time where both of us we were done like pretending to be who we weren't in order to, find success on the dating scene. So we were just being ourselves. And that was, I think, refreshing for both of us. And I think about this a lot. I honestly don't know if our relationship would have worked out had we met too much earlier. Like if we had met 6 months earlier, I don't know that we would have been in the right place in our lives to have that connection. And if it had been too much later, the pandemic would have started and we probably wouldn't have met either. So it was like just the right, perfect time. And yeah, just it's been it's not like an effortless relationship, but it's not more effort than it needs to be. People say relationships take work, which is true, but a lot of times people in bad relationships tell themselves, oh, relationships take work, when it's like they're working like, carrying a boulder on their back. And that's not the work that a relationship takes. It's just like the normal, like living with another person means you have to get past your own ego a lot of times. And you have to realize when you are doing something wrong and when you are difficult to live with and what you need to change about that. And like, committing to, we have to work through this no matter what. That is difficult no matter how compatible you are. And so you got to find the person who isn't adding anything onto it beyond what it's the normal difficulty level, if that makes sense. But yeah, I would say it's been a good. Could you call it a fairy tale romance? I don't know. I think it was probably even better than that because it was just like easy, just made sense.
Yeah, there is a level of effortlessness to it, even if it's not fully effortless, because all relationships require effort. I find that when you're able to explore the full range of your humanity or full spectrum of your thoughts or conversational topics with someone, you know that you're compatible with them because you don't have to limit yourself to a particular few topics and then that's it, the conversation dies. You're actually able to just relax and talk about whatever comes to your mind with another human being. And I think that that's what relating to a person and having good conversation is with a person. And it's interesting how you mentioned if the circumstances were way different, you might have not even ended up with this human being. And so there is almost a serendipitous element to our relationships. Like one moment you might meet someone at a bus stop that might change your life. And if circumstances were slightly different, you may never have crossed paths with this person. And so in a weird way, it makes you wonder if fate exists, if this was something that was preordained, or if it was just a coincidence. Either way, there is an element of chance or magic to life. And it seems like that drew you to your wife. And it's interesting how you thought it was going to end up poorly from the very beginning. You're like, maybe this is doomed. I messed it up.
Yeah.
And so it also teaches us the lesson of sometimes we feel like we've screwed up for good and that we have a point of no return with the situation. Oh, I've messed up and there's no recovering from this. I'm doomed. When really it may not be the case, that it might just be us telling ourselves that. You could see it as neuroticism in the big five or Enneagram 4 that you have, Frank James.
Yeah.
Where they tend to infer what might be missing or longing for something or feeling inherently deficient or broken. And so it's like, oh, did I break this situation because I'm broken?
Yeah, there's definitely that pattern that you can see, even if it's not there, where it's like, oh, here, I did it again. I messed this up. You know, um, I could have had a good thing going here, but oh, nope. So it's it is interesting. I think that to overcome that thought of, oh, I am inherently deficient, whether it's because, you're an Enneagram 4 or just because you've gone through some stuff in life. Um, I think there is it's something I continually am trying to learn. So it's not like I learned it then and I'm coasting now, but it's like not caring. Like, just like I don't care anymore. That day I just happened to be in the mindset of, I messed it up. And instead of beating myself up, I was just like, let's just, whatever. Let's see how it goes. It would be worse if I messed it up and then stayed in a bad mindset the rest of the day and like came into the date with this negative energy or this desperate energy of trying to turn it around. Like, let me prove to you that I'm not, a bad guy because I was late. It's just like, if this date doesn't work out, I'll, go back to the app and hopefully find another date to go on. Like, it was sort of just like, that's how it goes. Let's just forget the past. Let's not try to read any kind of pattern into it about my life.
Absolutely. So there's this element of acceptance and not taking life too seriously, which is a really big growth point. So a lot of suffering comes from taking life too seriously and stressing about things you can't control. And so you decided at that moment, well, it already happened. I can't control the past. So I'm just going to let it go and just let the moment be whatever it is, which is the ultimate form of letting yourself feel at peace no matter what happens to you. And so, yeah, sometimes life can be a simulation. It's like, is this really real? It's like, why should I take everything seriously? Like, I think you've mastered equanimity. That is the Enneagram 4 virtue, I believe. I could be wrong.
Yeah, I haven't done as much research on the Enneagram as I have on, the Myers-Briggs and that side of the personality stuff. And maybe, it is possible that what you're saying is true, because either that or I'm not an Enneagram 4, because I'm at a point now where I don't really relate to it anymore. Like, I related hardcore to it years ago. And now I'm sort of just like, am I a 4? Like, but then I'm like, what type would I be? Like, I don't even know. So I guess that's the thing about the Enneagram, is that you can, like, once you are able to kind of conquer that core fear. I mean, I know there is theories of it where it's like, if you're a healthy type, whatever, you start to resemble another type. Maybe that's what's happening. I don't know. I mean, I would never be so bold as to say I have made it. I have arrived. I have resolved the tension of my personality type. But it's possible. It's possible. I'm in a better space than I was 5 years ago. So I that would be fair to say.
Yeah, you're evolving as you go along. And
As
so
we all hopefully are.
definitely, yeah. And so in the Enneagram space, Beatrice Chestnut likes to talk about your personality type is who you are not. So actually the goal is transcending Enneagram 4 if you are an Enneagram 4. Even Carl Jung talks about your MBTI type. It's actually a representation of your one-sidedness. So the goal is actually to be able to individuate, which is use your other preference as much as possible. And so just as it's hard to open a jar with just one hand, you want to develop both preferences eventually so you can use two hands to open the jar. I think you're doing a good thing. Like, the harder it is to figure out your Enneagram type, it might also be a sign that you've grown past the common struggles of that type. And yeah, I find people who are either they've developed past their Enneagram type or they don't have many traumas in their life to begin with, have a harder time figuring out their Enneagram type, among a host of other reasons. And so, well, that's good for you.
Well,
Um,
I pat myself on the back about it. It's interesting you bring up the using your other hand thing, because I was just thinking about that earlier today, like trying to work out some of the difficulties of explaining Myers-Briggs and cognitive functions, etc. Because so often as I'm teaching it in my edutainment videos, people in the comments get confused that it is it's just there's a limitation of language when it's like, we're talking about, oh, someone has a feeling preference. It's hard to talk about it in a way that doesn't sound like they don't have thinking, or it's hard to talk about it in a way that makes sense, that you can grasp, but then also reflects the obvious experiences that we have in everyday life, because so many commenters who have not fully drunk the Kool-Aid of Myers-Briggs are like, it annoys me, but it's like they have a point where they're like, no one's just this or that. You're putting people in a box that's not, it's too black and white. And it's like, okay, yeah, I get what you mean, but yeah, I get what you mean, but you're wrong. But then I'm like, but how could you describe it better? And the idea of like, I'm right-handed, but it's not like my left hand is gone. Like I still have my left hand. And there are even things that I can do with my left hand that my right hand can't do. Like if I'm playing guitar, I, play the frets with the left hand. And if I were to switch it around, my right hand would be like lost. It wouldn't know what to do.
mm,
And I'm not good enough with my left hand to be able to do the most important things like write or, lift a fork to my mouth or whatever in the most proper way. But it's still there. I can still use it. And so that I just wanted to point out, I thought interesting analogy that you brought up, because I was thinking the exact same thing.
yeah. In the MBTI certification program, they teach you the method of you try signing with your dominant hand, and then you try signing with your non-dominant hand, and then you describe the experience, and that's the same as your MBTI type. So you do have a natural autopilot that's almost effortless to use, and then you can use your other hand, but it requires conscious effort, and it's not autopilot, and you actually need to actually concentrate to use it. And
Yeah.
so you have access to both. It's just about what is the starting point? What is the point that comes easiest to you that you go to if you don't control or make a concerted effort to go the other way?
Right.
And yeah. A way I like to combat the type is a label argument is we label things to understand them. So, a lot of things in our lives are categories, such as people who say male or female. Those are things that we put into categories to fully understand. Now, it's not meant to label you, it's just trying to put a name to a phenomenon. Even non-binary is a label or it's a category to understand something better. MBTI is not meant to label you, just as male, female, and non-binary is not necessarily there to label you. It's just to define your experience a little bit more cleanly. Now, instead of seeing type as a label, I see it as a filter. So it's a filter for incoming data and a filter for outgoing action. And so that's the perceiving and judging functions. It helps you put an understanding to the filters that you use on a daily basis. And Carl Jung, he talks about projection. And so because we have these filters, we end up applying our way of life onto other people. So for instance, Frank, if you didn't know your wife is a TE Dom and you saw it from your own lens, you're like, oh, she's being blunt because she doesn't care about me.
Mhm.
But when in reality, she cares about you, she just has a different filter than you. So if we don't know about type, we may be projecting our own motivations or our own way of being onto another person without realizing it. For instance, an ESTJ might think that, oh, because Frank isn't on task all the time, he doesn't care or respect me. Because the SJs, especially the STJs, are respect is being on task and following what I say. So if you don't, then you clearly don't respect me.
Right. Yeah.
And that's not the case. And so type helps us realize when we are projecting ourselves onto other people, and it helps us honor neurodiversity better. There's so much neurodiversity in the world. It's just not as obvious as our physical appearance because we don't see it overtly. So we assume that people are more similar to us than we give credit for until we realize that they're not, that we're jarred, that they have some sort of belief or way of being or way of operating in the world that is so different than us that we're like, wow, I'm so jarred by how different your approach is from my approach. And so learning about type helps us accept people who operate differently than us. And it helps us celebrate and embrace diversity rather than just tolerate it and assume negatively onto the other person. Because we always are coming up with these narratives of why people do what they do. And isn't
Mhm.
it better to approach that from a more compassionate lens rather than a judgmental lens, a more curious lens than a more closed way of seeing another person? So, type is just another way to respect neurodiversity and to recognize it. So,
Yeah, and you bring up a good point that it's like we all want to categorize people anyway. And I think that the argument of, you're just labeling people, you're putting them into boxes. The truth is that you're going to do that anyway. Like if whether you know about Myers-Briggs or not, you're putting people into boxes, and those boxes are probably not very well defined in your brain, and they might be inherently negative or inherently positive, whereas Myers-Briggs should not, it should all be neutral, although we know it's not in practice, but given a lot of the stereotypes. But rather than just be like, that person is rude, or that person is like a jerk, or oh, that person is very charming, it's like, yeah, they could be those things, but maybe it's just like, oh, if we like also understood this in the lens of type, which has more cleanly defined lines, you could then be like, oh, it's not that they are a bad whatever my type is, it's that they are being their type.
exactly. And there's an old adage that says everyone is different. So if you boil an egg, it hardens. And if you boil a potato, it softens. And so when you give everyone the same treatment, that is unfair to individuals. And so typology is ultimately going from the golden rule, which is treating people the way you want to be treated, to the platinum rule, treating people the way they want to be treated. And so you can only do that when you recognize another person as distinctly different than you rather than seeing everyone as a slightly tweaked version of yourself. And so, yeah, you're totally right, Frank. And I think the reason why typology is used for darker means, as in if we over stereotype people, it really just speaks for the collective conscious or the collective unconscious of society. You know how they say that you're holding on to a liquid or, like, let's say a coffee cup, and if someone bumps into you and coffee spills out, it's really just spilling out the contents that already exists within yourself. And so when people use type to stereotype or to look down on certain types, it's really a reflection of the collective unconscious of that person or of the society at large. That they, instead of using type for love, they use it as a way to divide. It just shows that our current society's level of spiritual awareness, which is using it to attack each other and polarize each other, which is what people are already doing with everything else, with politics, every other topic. You see polarization happening at every sphere. And so while type is a neutral tool, it can be used for whatever means that our collective society is unconsciously going through at that moment. So it's not to say that type is bad when it's being used in a bad way. It's just that it's a tool and it can be used to help generate more world peace, which was actually Isabel Myers-Briggs' desire when proliferating this instrument. Or it could be used to demean and degrade other people. It all depends on the user. Just like how a needle can be used to provide life-saving medication for someone, or a needle can be used to euthanize someone. It's a tool that's neutral that can be used for good or evil. And so, yeah, it's really a reflection of the user or the society. I desire to use type as a way to help people grow and develop into the best version of themselves, which I also think you have that goal too, Frank. So,
Yeah, and I keep thinking about the you know people using it to divide themselves from other people. And it is true. It's like, you talked about how so many, like, people are divided in so many different ways. And so then they bring that into type and they're like, okay, that person I don't like, what type are they? Okay, now I don't like anyone who's that type. It's like that. Okay, that type is the type that is like this type of person I hate, which, I've brought into this.
Mhm.
Uh, and I think part of it is also just the loaded language of a lot of MBTI that we, as people who are initiated into it, are more, we're comfortable with terms like thinking versus feeling or whatever. We get what it means, but it's like when people are just getting into it, when they're first introduced to it, I feel like it can also be like an initial gut reaction to the words, and they're like, okay, I don't want to be a feeler, or I don't want to be a thinker, or like though one or the other is bad. Like not even knowing what they mean, just bringing the connotation of the words that they already have into it with them. And like you pointed out, like it says a lot about the person who is typing or typing someone else, or their interpretation of different types. It says more about them than it does about the other people that they are pointing to, or the other types that they do or don't like. It's just a problem I keep thinking about. Like, how do you unload the language of it to make it less, to make it seem less of a, how do you divide people without making it clear that it's dividing people up? It's tough. Like it's difficult to make something neutral for everybody, I guess, is the issue I've been turning around in my mind recently.
Yeah, because human beings can carry a lot of baggage and then project that baggage onto typology very easily.
Hmm.
Um, I think one of the ways people can create less loaded language in MBTI is if you have a positive example of every type in the MBTI sphere, so that you can't really project all of your hate onto that one group and generalize them all, because you'll always have that one example of that cool person in that group too that will go against your preconceptions of that type.
That's really good, and that's something I struggle with too. If I can open up here about the comedy stuff, is that it is really difficult to make something funny without like turning towards like the more negative aspects of a personality type. And then also just like me having my stupid desire to give people what they want, I will make certain types more relatable than other types, just because it's like I know that people will not like it if I say, for instance, make the INFJ like unsympathetic this time around. Whereas if I make an ESTP unsympathetic, nobody cares, and even the ESTPs are like, haha, yeah, that's funny. So, um, yeah, it's difficult. Like I have sometimes a conflict of conscience where I'm like, I want to take down the stereotypes and do something that's a little more neutral, but it's when it comes to comedy, like I don't know how like comedy is meant to like roast people, at least the way I'm doing it. So it's interesting. Even when teaching it, like it's difficult to teach in a short YouTube video about types without getting into somewhat inaccurate stereotypes, because you have to draw things high contrast for people to latch onto it quickly. Like if you talk in all the subtleties of what reality actually is, it's like, what was that even about, Frank? So it's a big task for those of us who teach personality type to always be aware of that, to like try to draw just in high enough contrast to get the point across, but then also pull back and be like, hey, there's a lot of blurred lines around these things, and you've got to like think of things in a more broad way rather than the super narrow way where it's like ESTPs are just cool guys who talk fast and, like football or whatever, it's like there's more to it.
Yeah. It's easier to paint a very clear version of a type than to provide all the subtlety, because then it drowns out the clarity of the type.
Yeah.
So content creators like myself and Frank, we run into the struggle between integrity and people pleasing. Should we do what we know our audience will like more, or should we do something that's more informationally accurate towards the type? And it is this push and pull or conflict of content creators, because even for me, I'm like, should I create a 5 sign series or a listicle, which I know people will enjoy more? Or should I try to subtly deconstruct types and try to give people my nuanced take on how to understand these types in a more intellectually honest way? So there's always this to be or not to be. Either way, there is a pro and con to either way. So what do you pick? Algorithm, try to appeal to the algorithm and audience, or try to appeal to type ethics and trying to do type justice by representing it accurately? It's like, oh.
Yeah. I think it's hard to do, but what I have tried to do is approach it with kind of a synthesis of the two, where it's like, let me find a way to do the TI and put that out there, like what the logic that I am trying to express from my point of view, and then let me wrap it in the FE to maybe like confuse everyone, make them think that they like it, and then they accidentally through osmosis get the actual nugget of wisdom or whatever that I'm trying to put in there. Because if you go too far one way or the other, like, I mean, this is obvious, but it's detrimental. If you go too far into pleasing the audience, I think they catch on to it and they don't like it. And that's something I'm having to learn right now, is pulling back on that. And I'm in an uncomfortable position where I feel like I'm going to have to start doing a lot of like straight up masculine TI, and it doesn't feel comfortable at all. And like just putting out things that are a bit more serious, and like me expressing things that I think are problems that are important to solve in this
Mhm.
personality sphere, and making stuff about that rather than just like, hey, what are 10 most cool types. you know but then if you go too far in that other direction, you really run the risk of losing the audience if you haven't done enough smart planning and research and figuring out like where does what I want to say line up with what they want to hear, and how do I convince them to come along with me more towards my side of things. It's a constant push and pull, but I definitely think that people respect a creator who does their own thing and is willing to stand on that introverted decision making, but is also making it clear, like, hey, I'm also checking in with you guys to see, like, do you appreciate this or not? And if you don't, maybe I'll, do it a little bit and then I'll move on. I'll try something else.
Absolutely. And so, on that note, thank you, Frank James, for making the 16 types relevant through humor and for being people's gateway into this beautiful personality theory, and for representing this theoretical atmosphere in comedy, which your edutainment does so well. And yeah, you're a positive force in the typology world. You're very highly respected and very highly loved in this typology sphere. So I'm glad that I had the chance to interview you and hear your takes. We know the funny side of Frank James, but it's nice to also know about the down to earth side of you as well. And yeah, congrats on the family life and all this YouTube success that you're having. You well deserve it.
Thank you, Joyce. It's been great to chat with you. I really appreciate you having me on your channel. As I said, I really enjoy all the interviews that you do. I learn a lot by hearing all of the guests you get of different types, and hearing their different perspectives and everything. So keep it up.
Awesome. And so that's a wrap. Thanks everyone for watching Type Talks. My name is Joyce Ming, and I'll see you all later. Bye.